The scorching Arizona sun cast long shadows as Harriet Holloway stumbled through the dust of Copper Creek, her tattered dress stained with the evidence of her journey. Blood not all her own had dried in rusty patterns across the once fine fabric. Her eyes, wide with desperation, searched the scattered buildings of the frontier town for some sign of sanctuary in this unforgiving place. Preston Rawlins watched the woman from the wooden porch of the saloon, his weathered hat pulled low over his eyes. At 30, he'd seen enough of life's cruelties to recognize a desperate soul. As the town's reluctant sheriff, he knew trouble when it walked into town, and this woman was trailing it behind her like a shadow. "You look like you could use some help, madam," Preston called out, his voice carrying across the empty street. Harriet froze, her hand instinctively moving to the small revolver hidden in the folds of her dress. "I need no charity, sir." "Didn't offer any," Preston replied, stepping down from the porch. The badge on his chest caught the light as he approached. "But a woman doesn't walk into Copper Creek looking like she's been dragged through hell without a reason." Harriet's legs finally gave out beneath her and she collapsed into the dust. Preston was at her side in an instant, strong arms lifting her before she could protest. "I can't stay here," she whispered, her voice hoarse from thirst. "They're coming." Preston's jaw tightened. "Who's coming?" "The Blackwell Gang," she managed, her eyes fluttering as consciousness began to slip away from her. "I saw what they did. They'll kill anyone who helps me." As darkness claimed her, Preston made a decision that would change both their lives forever. "Then I reckon we'd best be prepared when they arrive." When Harriet awoke, she found herself in an unfamiliar room, lying on a simple bed with clean sheets. The room was sparsely furnished: a dresser, a wash basin, and a chair where Preston Rawlins sat watching her with curious eyes. "You've been out for nearly a day," he said, offering her a cup of water. "Doc Watson patched you up, said you were suffering from exhaustion and dehydration, but nothing that won't heal." Harriet took the water gratefully, drinking deeply before speaking. "I need to leave. Now." "The Blackwell Gang," Preston said, not as a question but a statement. "What did you see?" Harriet's hands trembled. "They murdered the governor's envoy. I was traveling with the stagecoach as a companion to Mrs. Livingston. We stopped at a way station and I went to gather wildflowers. When I returned," her voice broke. "Everyone was dead, even the children." Preston stood and walked to the window, peering out at the dusty street. "And they saw you." "Yes, I ran, stole a horse from the station. They've been hunting me for 3 days. Copper Creek isn't much, but we've got good people here. I'm the law, such as it is." Harriet laughed bitterly. "One sheriff against Silas Blackwell and his men. They'll burn this town to the ground to get to me." Preston turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "Why don't you rest?" "We can talk more when you're stronger." "You don't understand," Harriet insisted. "I need to keep moving. Running won't save you, Miss Holloway. Sooner or later, you'll have to make a stand." The next morning, Harriet insisted on meeting the town council. Preston arranged for them to gather at the church, the only building in Copper Creek large enough to hold everyone comfortably. Mayor Elkins, a portly man with shrewd eyes, sat at the front with the town's most influential citizens. Preston stood beside Harriet as she recounted her story, her voice growing stronger with each word. "The Blackwell Gang has been terrorizing territories from Texas to Colorado," Preston added when she finished. "The governor's been trying to bring them to justice for years." "And now you've brought them to our doorstep," spat Howard Jenkins, the owner of the general store. "We're just trying to survive out here, Sheriff. We can't fight a war." "She needs protection," Preston argued. "Then take her to Fort Collins," suggested Margaret Wilson, the schoolteacher. "The Army can handle this." "It's a 3-day ride to the fort," Preston countered. "They'd catch up before we got halfway there." "Then what do you suggest?" Mayor Elkins asked, his tone making it clear he had little interest in heroics. "We prepare. We stand together. When they come, we show them that Copper Creek isn't just another easy target." The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, Jenkins stood. "I say we vote. Who's willing to risk their lives for this stranger?" Hands remained firmly in laps. Even the usually courageous blacksmith, Thomas Miller, avoided making eye contact. "You're all cowards," Preston said quietly. "We're survivors," corrected the mayor. "I'm sorry, Miss Holloway, but the council's decision is that you should move on. We'll provide you with supplies, but you can't stay here." Harriet nodded, having expected nothing less. "I understand. I'll leave at dawn." Outside the church, Preston caught up with her. "I don't agree with their decision." "It doesn't matter," Harriet replied. "They're right to be afraid." "There's another option," Preston said. "My ranch is about 10 miles outside of town. It's not much, but it's defensible. You could stay there until we figure something out." Harriet studied his face, searching for ulterior motives. "Why would you risk your life for me? You don't even know me." "I know enough," Preston answered. "I know you survived when others didn't. I know you're brave enough to tell the truth, even when it puts you in danger." "They'll laugh if you keep me," Harriet warned, gesturing toward the townsfolk filing out of the church. "They'll say you've lost your mind." Preston's eyes hardened with resolve. "Then let them watch and learn. Sometimes a man has to stand for something, even if he stands alone." The journey to Preston's ranch was tense, both riders constantly scanning the horizon for signs of pursuit. The property itself was modest, a small cabin nestled against a rocky hillside, with a barn and corral for horses. A creek ran nearby, providing water even in the driest seasons. "It's not much," Preston apologized as they dismounted, "but my father built it to last." "It's perfect," Harriet replied honestly. After days of running, the simple cabin looked like paradise. Inside, Preston showed her to a small bedroom. "My sister used to stay here when she visited, before she moved to San Francisco." He gestured to a trunk at the foot of the bed. "There might be some clothes that would fit you." "Thank you," Harriet said, suddenly aware of how filthy she was. "I don't know how to repay your kindness." "Help me fortify this place," Preston replied pragmatically. "The Blackwells won't be far behind." Over the next few days, they worked side by side, reinforcing windows, stockpiling ammunition, and creating defensive positions. Harriet proved herself handy with tools and unafraid of hard work. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch, watching the sunset and sharing stories of their lives. Harriet told him about growing up in Boston, the daughter of a successful merchant who had lost everything in a fire. How she'd taken the position as a lady's companion to Mrs. Livingston to escape mounting debts after her father's death. Preston shared how he'd come to the Arizona Territory with his parents as a boy, how they'd carved this ranch from untamed wilderness, how his father had been killed by Apache raiders and his mother had died of fever 2 winters later, how he'd taken the sheriff's badge because no one else would, and the town needed someone to stand between them and chaos. On the 5th night, as they sat by the fire inside the cabin, Preston finally asked the question that had been bothering him. "The Blackwells, they're brutal men, but they don't usually chase one witness this far. What aren't you telling me?" Harriet's face paled. She reached into her pocket and withdrew a small leather pouch. "Before I ran, I took this from the envoy's satchel." She emptied the contents onto the table, a folded document and a small brass key. "What is it?" Preston asked, picking up the document. "Evidence. Names, dates, amounts paid. The governor's envoy was carrying proof that several territorial officials have been taking bribes from the Blackwell Gang, including the marshal in Santa Fe." Preston whistled low. No wonder they're hunting you so hard. This could hang half a dozen men. The key opens a lockbox in the First National Bank of Denver. There's more evidence there enough to dismantle their entire operation. You're carrying a small fortune in secrets, Preston remarked, carefully refolding the document. Now you understand why I can't stay, Harriet said sadly. I've put you in terrible danger. Preston reached across the table, his hand covering hers. I understood the risk when I brought you here. The touch of his calloused fingers against her skin sent an unexpected warmth through Harriet. She looked up to find his eyes fixed on hers, and for a moment, the danger seemed distant and unimportant. Preston, she began, but was interrupted by the urgent barking of his dog outside. Both of them moved instantly, Preston grabbing his rifle while Harriet extinguished the lamp. They took up positions at windows, peering into the darkness. Riders, Preston whispered. At least 3, maybe 4. Blackwell? Harriet asked, her voice barely audible. Can't tell yet, stay low. The riders approached slowly, their silhouettes visible in the moonlight. Preston's finger tensed on the trigger, but then he relaxed slightly. It's Miller, the blacksmith, and some of the townsmen. He moved to the door, opening it just enough to call out, "That's far enough. State your business." Thomas Miller's voice carried across the yard. "It's just us, Sheriff. We came to warn you. Strangers rode into town about an hour ago, asking questions about a woman matching Miss Holloway's description." Preston stepped onto the porch, keeping his rifle ready. "How many?" "7 that we saw," replied Miller. "Mean-looking bunch. Said they were bounty hunters with a warrant, but Jenkins recognized one of them from a wanted poster. It's the Blackwells, all right." "And you rode out to warn us?" Preston asked, suspicion evident in his voice. "The same men who voted to send her away." Another rider moved forward, Howard Jenkins himself. "We were wrong, Sheriff. After you left, we got to talking. This town's been hiding from trouble for too long. Maybe it's time we stood for something." Preston studied the men, 5 in total, including the mayor. "You know what you're getting yourselves into." "We brought supplies," Mayor Elkins said, patting his saddlebag, "and every gun we could spare. They're saying they'll be here by morning." Harriet stepped onto the porch beside Preston. "You didn't have to come. This isn't your fight." "Begging your pardon, madam," Miller said, tipping his hat. "But when a gang of killers comes to our town threatening to burn it down if we don't hand over an innocent woman, it becomes our fight." By dawn, they had transformed the ranch into a fortress. The townsmen had spread the word before leaving Copper Creek, and throughout the night, more people arrived, miners from the hills, farmers from outlying homesteads, even Margaret Wilson, the schoolteacher, who arrived with her father's old army rifle and a determination that surprised everyone. Preston watched with growing admiration as Harriet organized the newcomers, assigning positions and distributing ammunition with the efficiency of a seasoned commander. "You'd have made a fine general," he remarked, as she instructed 2 young farmers on how to create a crossfire zone. "My father fought in the war," she explained. "He used to tell me stories about battle strategies. I never thought I'd need to use that knowledge." The sun had barely cleared the eastern hills when a cloud of dust appeared on the horizon. Preston called everyone to their positions. "Remember," he instructed, "we're not looking for a fight. If they're willing to leave peacefully, all the better." "You think there's a chance of that?" Harriet asked skeptically. "Not much," Preston admitted, "but I'd rather not have blood on our hands if we can avoid it." The Blackwell Gang approached with the confidence of men accustomed to getting their way. Silas Blackwell himself led the procession, a tall, lean figure with a face scarred by smallpox and eyes cold as winter. They stopped just beyond rifle range, and Silas called out, "I'm looking for Sheriff Rawlins." Preston stepped out from behind the barricade they'd built, making sure he was visible but still protected. "That's me. What's your business here, Blackwell? So you know who I am, Silas chuckled. Makes this simpler. I've come for the woman. She's a thief and a murderess with a bounty on her head. Funny, I haven't seen any wanted posters with her description, Preston called back, and I make it my business to know every fugitive in the territory. The posters are coming, Blackwell insisted, but I'm authorized to take her now. Hand her over and we'll be on our way. Nobody needs to get hurt. Preston shook his head. I can't do that. Miss Holloway is under my protection, and she'll remain so until I see official papers from a legitimate court. Blackwell's face darkened. You're making a mistake, Sheriff. There's 7 of us and what you and that woman. Is she worth dying for? At that moment, Howard Jenkins stood up from his position, rifle in hand. Then Thomas Miller. One by one, nearly 20 people revealed themselves, all armed and determined. Blackwell's men shifted nervously in their saddles. They'd expected an easy target, not an army. As you can see, Preston said calmly, Miss Holloway has made some friends. Now you have 2 choices. Ride away and never come back, or try your luck against odds you can't beat. Silas Blackwell's hand inched toward his pistol. You think these farmers and shopkeepers will stand against us? We've killed better men than these. Maybe so, Preston acknowledged, but how many of your men will die in the process? Are you willing to sacrifice them for this? A tense silence followed. Finally, one of Blackwell's men leaned over and whispered something in his ear. Silas scowled but eventually nodded. This isn't over, Sheriff, he called. We'll be back with more men and proper papers. We'll be waiting, Preston assured him. The gang turned their horses and rode away, disappearing into the distance. A cheer went up from the defenders, but Preston remained vigilant. Don't celebrate yet. They'll be back. That night, with most of the townspeople having returned to Copper Creek to prepare for the inevitable return of the Blackwell Gang, Preston and Harriet sat alone by the fire. You should leave while you can, Harriet said suddenly. Take the evidence to the governor yourself. I'll draw the Blackwells away. Preston looked at her incredulously. After all this, you're still planning to run. I'm trying to save your life, Harriet insisted. And the lives of everyone in Copper Creek. Blackwell won't stop coming. And you think sacrificing yourself will change that? Preston stood, running a hand through his hair in frustration. These men, they came here today because they believe in standing up for what's right. If you run now, you dishonor their courage. I never asked them to fight for me, Harriet cried, rising to face him. No, you didn't, Preston agreed, his voice softening. But they chose to anyway. That's what community means, Harriet, standing together even when it's dangerous. Especially then. Harriet turned away, but Preston gently took her shoulders, turning her back to face him. Why is it so hard for you to accept help, to believe that people might want to protect you? Because everyone I've ever cared about is dead, Harriet whispered, tears forming in her eyes. My father, Mrs. Livingston, the others on that stagecoach. I can't bear to watch anyone else die because of me. Preston's hands moved to cup her face. Some things are worth dying for, Harriet. Some people too. Before she could respond, he leaned down and kissed her a gentle, questioning kiss that took her by surprise. For a moment she remained frozen, then melted against him, her arms encircling his neck as the kiss deepened. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Preston rested his forehead against hers. I know we've only known each other a week, but I feel like I've been waiting for you my whole life. Preston, Harriet began, uncertainty in her voice. You don't have to say anything, he assured her. I just wanted you to know how I feel in case. He didn't finish the thought. In case we don't survive tomorrow, Harriet completed for him. Preston nodded grimly. Blackwell will bring more men. It's going to get ugly. Harriet took a deep breath, seeming to make a decision. Then we should make tonight count. Their second kiss was more urgent, filled with the desperation of people who understood that tomorrow was not guaranteed. That night, in the sanctuary of Preston's room, they found solace in each other's arms, their bodies speaking the promises their words could not yet form. The next morning brought news from town scouts had spotted Blackwell's gang, now numbering nearly 20 men, camped just a few miles away. They were clearly preparing for an attack. Preston gathered everyone at the ranch. Nearly 30 defenders had arrived overnight, including several experienced Indian fighters and former soldiers. "They'll come at noon," Preston predicted. "Blackwell's too arrogant to attack at dawn like a sensible man would. He'll want us to see him coming to fear him." "Then we'll disappoint him," Thomas Miller said, checking the action on his shotgun. Preston turned to Harriet. "You should stay inside the cellar. It's the safest place." "If everyone else is fighting, so am I," Harriet insisted, patting the revolver at her hip. "I'm a good shot. My father taught me." Preston knew better than to argue. Instead, he assigned her to defend the house alongside Margaret Wilson and 2 others. True to Preston's prediction, the Blackwell Gang appeared on the horizon as the sun reached its zenith. They had indeed grown in number, at least 20 riders spread out in a line, with Silas Blackwell at the center. But instead of charging immediately, Blackwell sent a single rider forward under a white flag. "What's he playing at?" Howard Jenkins muttered. "Let's find out," Preston replied, stepping out to meet the messenger. The rider, a young man barely out of his teens, looked nervous as he handed Preston a folded paper. "Mr. Blackwell says to give you this. It's official." Preston unfolded the document, a wanted poster with Harriet's face crudely drawn on it, and a reward of $500 for her capture, dead or alive. At the bottom was the signature of Marshal James Fletcher of Santa Fe. "This is the marshal who's taking bribes from your boss," Preston said, keeping his voice low. "It's worthless." The young man shifted uncomfortably. "Mr. Blackwell says you have 5 minutes to hand over the woman or they're coming and shooting." Preston studied the boy. "You don't look like a killer, son. You still have a choice." "No, sir, I don't," the messenger replied, his eyes darting to where Blackwell waited. "He killed my brother when I tried to leave the gang. Said he'd do the same to me if I ever disobeyed." Preston nodded in understanding. "When the shooting starts, find cover and keep your head down. After it's over, if you're still alive, come find me. I'll see you get a fair shake." The messenger looked surprised but nodded slightly before turning his horse and riding back to the gang. "What did he want?" Harriet asked when Preston returned. "To scare us with this." Preston handed her the wanted poster. "Blackwell's getting desperate." 5 minutes, Preston called out to the defenders. "Make them count." The attack, when it came, was brutal and direct. The Blackwell Gang charged the ranch from 3 directions, guns blazing. The defenders replied in kind, and soon the air was thick with gunsmoke and the thunderous echo of rifles. 2 attackers fell in the initial charge, but they kept coming, seeking cover behind rocks and fallen logs. One of the farmers took a bullet to the shoulder and had to be dragged to safety by Howard Jenkins, who showed surprising courage under fire. Preston moved between defensive positions, encouraging his people and directing their fire. Harriet proved her claim about being a good shot, taking down one of Blackwell's men with a clean hit as he tried to reach the porch. The battle raged for nearly an hour, with neither side gaining a clear advantage. 3 of the defenders had been wounded, though none fatally, and at least 5 of Blackwell's men were down. Then Silas Blackwell himself led a charge toward the main house, clearly intent on capturing Harriet. Preston saw the danger and rushed to intercept, exchanging fire with Blackwell as they closed the distance. A bullet grazed Preston's arm, but he kept moving, determined to protect Harriet at all costs. He reached the porch just as Blackwell was about to break through the door. "It's over, Blackwell," Preston shouted, his rifle aimed at the outlaw's heart. Blackwell turned slowly, a cruel smile spreading across his scarred face. "Not quite, Sheriff." He nodded toward the barn where flames had begun to spread. It was a diversion designed to pull defenders away from the house. Preston didn't fall for it. "Your men are dying out there. Surrender now and I'll see you get a fair trial." Blackwell laughed. "You think I fear hanging? I've cheated death more times than you've drawn breath." "Not this time," came Harriet's voice from the doorway. She stood with her revolver pointed at Blackwell's head, her aim steady despite the chaos around them. Blackwell's eyes narrowed. "The woman who started all this trouble. Do you know how many men have died because of you? Because of me?" Harriet's voice rose in indignation. "You murdered innocent people. You've terrorized this territory for years. Their blood is on your hands, not mine." For a moment, no one moved. Then Blackwell made his decision, swinging his gun toward Harriet with lightning speed. Preston fired first. His bullet caught Blackwell in the chest, staggering him. But the outlaw was tough. He managed to squeeze off a shot before collapsing. Harriet cried out as the bullet tore through her side, and she fell back into the doorway. "Harriet!" Preston rushed to her side, his heart pounding with fear. Blood seeped through her dress, but when he examined the wound, he found it wasn't as bad as he'd feared. The bullet had passed through flesh without hitting anything vital. "I'm all right," she assured him, though her face was pale with pain. "What about Blackwell?" Preston glanced at the outlaw's motionless form. "He won't trouble anyone again." With their leader dead, the remaining members of the Blackwell Gang lost heart. Some fled, while others, including the young messenger, surrendered. The battle for the ranch was over, but the cost had been high: 2 defenders dead, and several more wounded, including Harriet, in the days that followed. As Harriet recovered from her wound, news of the battle spread throughout the territory. The governor himself sent a telegram thanking the people of Copper Creek for their bravery, and promised that the evidence Harriet had preserved would be used to prosecute the corrupt officials who had enabled the Blackwell Gang. A month after the battle, with her strength restored, Harriet faced a decision. The governor had offered her a position as a special investigator, tasked with rooting out remaining corruption in the territory. "It's a good offer," she told Preston as they sat on the porch of his ranch watching the sunset. "Important work." "It is," Preston agreed, his expression carefully neutral. "When would you leave?" "That's what I wanted to talk to you about," Harriet said, turning to face him. "I don't want to leave, not without you." Preston's eyes widened with surprise. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I love you, Preston Rawlins. I love the man who took in a stranger when everyone else turned away, who stood up for what was right, even when it meant standing alone." Preston took her hands in his. "I love you too, Harriet, more than I thought possible, but your work with the governor can wait," Harriet interrupted. "Or better yet, we could do it together. The governor needs honest lawmen as much as he needs investigators." Preston smiled, pulling her close. "Are you proposing to me, Miss Holloway?" "Perhaps I am, Sheriff Rawlins," Harriet replied with a mischievous smile. "Would that be so terrible?" Instead of answering with words, Preston kissed her a kiss full of promise and certainty. When they finally parted, he brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Not terrible at all. In fact, I can't imagine anything more perfect." 3 months later, they were married in the church in Copper Creek. The entire town turned out for the celebration, along with the governor and several territorial officials who had come to personally thank Harriet for her courage. Howard Jenkins, who had become one of their closest friends after the battle, gave a toast that brought tears to many eyes. To Preston and Harriet Rawlins, who taught us all that sometimes, standing together is the only way to stand at all. As they danced under the stars that night, Harriet leaned close to Preston's ear. "Remember when I told you they'd laugh if you kept me?" Preston nodded, holding her tighter. "And I said, then let them watch and learn." Harriet smiled, resting her head against his chest. "They learned. We all did." In the years that followed, Preston and Harriet worked side by side, bringing justice to the Arizona territory. They had 3 children, 2 sons, and a daughter who grew up hearing the story of how their parents had found love in the midst of danger, and how a community had come together to stand against evil. And on quiet evenings, when the children were asleep and the house was still, Preston and Harriet would sit on the porch of their ranch, watching the sunset just as they had on that first night, grateful for the courage that had brought them together and the love that had made them whole.